The corridor felt colder than usual as I made my way toward the boiler room. The soft scrape of my shoes against the worn floorboards swallowed by the oppressive silence that seemed to seep from the very walls. The dim glow of the single bulb overhead flickered sporadically, casting grotesque shadows that danced just beyond the edges of my vision. I had heard whispers that Mr. Whittaker might be found here during the late hours, and despite the gnawing uncertainty twisting in my gut, I needed answers. I paused at the edge of the iron door, hand hovering hesitantly above the cold handle. The faint smell of rust and damp wood spilled out, mingled with an undercurrent of something older, something decayed. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open with a creak that echoed down the empty hall. There, seated on a battered wooden bench, was Mr. Whittaker. His gaunt figure hunched beneath the dim light, the gray strands of his hair barely catching the faint glow, his eyes shadowed and distant. "You're up late," he said without turning, his voice low and gravelly. I need to ask you about the staircase," I confessed, stepping inside, the door closing behind me with a thud that seemed to seal us in a world apart. He sighed, the sound heavy with years of unspoken burdens. "It's not a subject I take lightly," he murmured. "That staircase has been here longer than any of us care to remember. It comes for the curious, the unwary, the broken, and it never lets go without a price." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling like a stone in my chest. "Why, what does it want?" His eyes finally met mine, flickering with a sorrow that seemed to stretch across decades. "Innocence," he said simply. "It feeds on it, traps it. Every laughter that echoes at dawn, it's not just a memory. It's a fragment of a soul it never returned." The room seemed to grow colder still, the shadows lengthening until they swallowed the edges of the bench where he sat. "I've tried to keep students away," he admitted, voice dropping to a whisper. "But the staircase, it calls. It's a siren song few can resist." As I listened, a sudden rustle caught my attention. Mr. Whittaker reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, rusted key, its metal dull but unmistakably cold. He pressed it into my palm, his fingers lingering for a moment, trembling slightly. "If you go near that staircase," he warned, "remember it doesn't just take you up. It takes pieces of your soul." The weight of the key was heavy and cold against my skin, a tangible reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond the edge of understanding. I nodded, unable to voice the torrent of questions swirling in my mind. "Be careful, Evelyn," he said, his voice cracking like old wood. "Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again." I left the boiler room with the key burning a hole in my pocket and a chill trailing down my spine. The halls outside were silent, but beneath the stillness, I could almost hear the faint echo of laughter, haunting, distant, and unmistakably crimson. The midnight chimes began to toll, each strike a reminder that the staircase would soon appear. And with it, the nightmare would deepen. Despite the dread curling in my stomach, a fierce spark of determination ignited within me. If the staircase was a trap, if it fed on stolen innocence and shattered souls, then I would be the one to end it. I would face whatever darkness lay at the top of those blood-red steps, even if it meant losing parts of myself in the process. As I walked back toward my dormitory, the key felt heavier still, as if it carried not just metal, but the weight of countless forgotten stories, silent screams, and the fragile remnants of childhoods lost to the shadows. The night had only just begun, and the cursed heart of the boarding school was waiting. And so was I. The corridors of the ancient boarding school seemed to breathe with a restless life after twilight. On this particular night, the air was thick with unease, an almost tangible tension that clung to the cracked plaster and faded tapestries like a second skin. I moved cautiously, my footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Around me, the dim lights flickered erratically, casting wavering pools of pale illumination that seemed insufficient to hold back the encroaching darkness. I wasn't alone in feeling the change. The chill that settled over the school was not merely the cold of late autumn, but something far more sinister, and it gnawed at the edges of my resolve. As I rounded a corner near the east wing, A faint murmur brushed past my ear, a whisper, barely audible yet unmistakable. I froze. The voice carried a strange cadence, a breathy susurration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Evelyn," I whipped my head around, heart hammering, but the corridor was empty. The shadows pooled like ink in the corners, and the flickering light above cast long, trembling figures that seemed to move with a life of their own. My breath came shallow and quick, the echo of that whispered name lingering in my mind. Later, I found Marcus sitting alone in the library's dimmest nook, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The skeptical veneer he usually wore was cracked. The weight of recent events had begun to erode his disbelief. "Marcus," I whispered, approaching cautiously. "What's wrong?" He glanced at me, his sharp eyes shadowed with something new unease. "I saw it," he admitted in a low voice. "A shadow, it moved independently. It whispered my name. I thought it was my imagination, but it wasn't." I swallowed hard, feeling the cold grip of dread tighten. If Marcus was shaken, then the truth could no longer be denied. The crimson staircase was more than a phantom. It was a conduit for something malevolent, something that fed on fear. Our uneasy alliance was tested that evening by Leela's restless energy. She stormed into our meeting spot, eyes blazing with defiant fire. "We can't just sit here and wait for the next disappearance," she snapped. "This," she gestured vaguely toward the dark windows where the night pressed close like a shroud, "this thing wants us to be afraid. But fear is weakness. We fight by facing it head-on." Her words were a spark in the dark, igniting a flame of reckless hope. Marcus shook his head, wary. "Leela, rushing in without a plan will only get us killed," she scoffed. "Better to die trying than to disappear without a trace." The tension between her and Marcus crackled in the stale air, and I found myself caught in the middle, torn between caution and the desperate urge to act. That night, as the clock edged toward midnight, I wandered the shadowed halls once more. The whispers grew louder, threading through the silence like venom. Suddenly, from the darkness ahead, emerged Mr. Whittaker. His gaunt face was etched with lines deeper than I'd noticed before, his eyes dull but intense. "You're treading a dangerous path, Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice gravelly. "Some knowledge comes at too high a cost. There are wounds in this place that have never healed, and some shadows never truly dissipate." I searched his face for more, but he turned and vanished into the gloom as silently as he had appeared. His warning settled over me like a shroud, heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. The nights grew darker, the shadows longer and more ominous. Marcus no longer dismissed the whispers. Leela's defiance drove us closer to the edge. And I, caught between fear and fascination, felt the invisible pull of the crimson staircase growing stronger. Each flicker of light, each passing shadow, seemed to beckon me toward a fate I could neither resist nor fully understand. As dawn approached, the echo of laughter twisted through the halls, a chilling reminder of those who had climbed and vanished before us. I clutched my journal tighter, the pages filling with hurried notes and trembling sketches. The shadows were watching, waiting, and soon I would have to face them. The question that haunted me was no longer if the staircase was real, but what awaited those who dared to ascend it, and whether we could survive the night that was closing in around us. The school had become a labyrinth of shadows and suspicions, and I was trapped within its dark heart, racing against time and terror to uncover a truth that might save us all or doom us forever. The crescendo of unease was palpable as the whispers turned into voices and the shadows began to stretch with sinister intent. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the chill of breath on my neck, the cold touch of fear that crept beneath my skin. The school was no longer just a building, it was a living nightmare, and we were its prey. But amidst the darkness, a fragile spark of resolve flickered within me. I would not let the crimson staircase claim another soul without a fight. And so, with the first light of dawn still hours away, I prepared to delve deeper into the abyss, knowing that tonight, the shadows would reveal their true face. The hour had slipped past midnight, and an uneasy hush had settled over the boarding school's shadowed halls. The air seemed heavier, thick with a mixture of anticipation and dread that prickled at my skin. Marcus and I had just finished reviewing the fragments of the journal I'd found, the ink smeared with time and sorrow, when a sudden noise drew our attention to the corridor outside the library. "Leela," Marcus muttered, his voice tight with unease. "She's out there again." I peered through the narrow window of the library door and caught sight of her slender figure pacing near the old staircase alcove. The crimson glow was already beginning to seep from the wall, like blood oozing from a wound. Despite the warnings we'd exchanged, the allure of the staircase had drawn her like a moth to flame. "She shouldn't be out here," I whispered, heart pounding. "We told her it's dangerous." Marcus ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, frustration etched across his sharp features. "She's reckless, but maybe she's trying to prove something to herself or to the rest of us." I swallowed hard and stepped out into the corridor, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The crimson staircase had fully materialized now, its steps glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Leela stood at its base, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, eyes fixed upward with a fierce determination that chilled me. "Leela, please," I called out, trying to steady my voice. "Don't do this. You don't know what's up there." She turned to me, her piercing eyes reflecting the staircase's eerie glow. "I have to," she said simply, voice steady, but layered with something raw and vulnerable. "If I don't face this, I'll never be free of the fear." Marcus stepped forward, his tone firm but pleading. "We can figure this out together. We don't need to risk it like this." But Leela shook her head, a rebellious spark igniting within her. "You don't understand. This is my fight." Before I could protest again, she placed her foot on the first glowing step. The crimson light seemed to ripple beneath her weight, as if responding to her resolve. I felt a cold wave wash over me, an instinctual warning that I couldn't ignore. "Leela, wait," I cried, but it was too late. She ascended, each step silent but heavy with portent. Marcus and I exchanged a helpless glance as the staircase seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness above. Then, without warning, the faint echo of her footsteps ceased. A silence heavier than the night itself engulfed the corridor. "She's gone," Marcus breathed, disbelief and fear mingling in his voice. I nodded numbly, the dread settling deep within my chest. The staircase pulsed once more, a soft, sinister glow that seemed to mock our helplessness. Suddenly, the heavy footsteps of Mr. Whittaker echoed from the far end of the hall. The caretaker appeared, his weathered face grim and eyes shadowed with knowledge that weighed upon him like a shroud. "I warned her," he said quietly, voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and urgency. "That staircase, it takes more than just those who climb it. It feeds on their fears, their innocence." I looked at him, desperation clawing at my throat. "How do we stop it? How do we save her?" He shook his head slowly. "There's no simple answer, but you too, you have a chance. You must confront what lies beyond." The distant echo of laughter drifted down the hallway, chilling and hollow, carrying a weight that made my blood run cold. It was Leela's laughter, or was it? The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I knew then that nothing would ever be the same. Marcus grabbed my hand, his grip steady despite the terror in his eyes. "We face it together," he vowed. I nodded, steeling myself against the encroaching darkness. The crimson staircase awaited, a gateway to a nightmare I could no longer avoid. As the laughter faded into silence, I realized that the true horror was only beginning. Together, we would have to climb or be consumed by the shadows that had claimed our friend. The night was far from over. The corridor's dim light flickered as we approached the staircase's base, the crimson steps glowing with an eerie vitality. I could feel the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides, broken only by the faintest hum of the entity's presence. Marcus's breath was shallow beside me, but his resolve was unwavering. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed my fear, nodding with determination. For Leela, for all of us. The first step was cold beneath my foot, but the crimson glow seemed to pulse with warmth, deceptive and inviting. As I ascended, the world around me shifted. The familiar walls of the school melted away into swirling shadows and twisting shapes. The oppressive darkness wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud, but I forced my gaze upward. chasing the faint glimmers of light that promised a way forward. Behind me, I heard Marcus climbing, his footsteps steady and sure despite the surreal landscape. Together, we would face the malevolent force that had ensnared Leela and countless others before her. The staircase was no longer just a mystery, it was a battleground. My heart hammered in my chest as a distorted childlike silhouette flickered at the edge of my vision, its blood-red eyes glowing with hunger. The crimson entity had revealed itself, and there was no turning back. The air grew thick with memories twisted and tangled, the shadows whispering secrets too terrible to voice. Leela's disappearance was no longer just a tragedy, it was a summons. The staircase had claimed another, and we were next in its deadly game. The haunting echo of her laughter lingered, a cruel reminder that the line between childhood wonder and nightmare was thinner than I ever dared imagine. I clutched Marcus's hand tighter, drawing strength from his presence as we prepared to descend further into the abyss. The fight for our souls had begun, and the crimson nightmare was far from over. The library was a cavern of shadows and dust, a sanctuary for forgotten stories and whispered secrets. Evelyn's footsteps echoed softly against the cold stone floor as she followed Marcus deeper into the labyrinthine stacks. The air was thick with the musk of aged paper, a scent that seemed to seep into her skin, binding her ever tighter to the mysteries she sought to unravel. "Look at this," Marcus murmured, his voice a cautious whisper that barely disturbed the heavy silence. He held a brittle folder, its edges yellowed and fragile, the ink on its label faded to near illegibility. Records of disappearances stretching back decades. Evelyn's heart quickened. She took the folder carefully, as if it might crumble beneath her touch. The pages crackled softly as she turned them, revealing names, dates, and brief, unsettling notes, each entry a ghostly echo of a student swallowed by the boarding school's dark history. Their investigation had begun as a tentative probing, fueled by rumors and fear. But now, each document seemed to pulse with a sinister life of its own, weaving a tapestry of loss and silence across the decades. Evelyn traced a trembling finger down one page, noting the pattern: disappearances clustered around certain years, always accompanied by strange annotations, symbols she couldn't decipher, references to the crimson stairway, and cryptic mentions of the entity. "This is more than coincidence," she said, voice low and urgent. "There's a pattern here, Marcus. A design." Marcus nodded, brows furrowed in thought. "But why would the school keep this hidden?" Before Evelyn could answer, a quiet shuffle approached from behind. Mr. Whittaker emerged from the shadows, his face etched with lines carved by time and secrets. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, bore into them with a weight that made Evelyn shiver. "Digging where you shouldn't," he said gravely. "This place has bones buried beneath its foundations, stories best left untold." Evelyn met his gaze undeterred. "I have to know, for Nina, for all of them," he sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Then know this. The staircase is no mere legend. It's a wound in the school's soul, fed by pain and innocence lost. The entity thrives on those who climb, trapping them in a cycle that's older than any of you realize." His words hung heavy in the air as Evelyn turned back to the documents. Hours passed, the light outside fading into a bruised twilight, yet she and Marcus remained ensnared in the records. They uncovered letters from long-gone staff, reports suppressed or altered, and photographs of students whose eyes seemed to plead for release. One ledger bound in cracked leather caught Evelyn's attention. Its pages were filled with names and dates, but at the margins, scribbled in a shaky hand, were symbols that matched those in the folder. As she studied them, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Each name was a thread in a tapestry of suffering, each date a marker of a night when the crimson staircase had claimed another soul. The room seemed to grow colder, shadows deepening as if the past itself pressed inward. A whisper brushed against her ear, a faint echo of laughter, brittle and hollow. Evelyn's breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. "We're not alone here," Marcus whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. She swallowed her fear, steeling herself against the encroaching darkness. "We have to keep going. The truth is here, hidden beneath layers of silence. And if we don't find it, no one will." As they gathered the documents, a sudden thud echoed from the stacks behind them. They spun around, hearts pounding, but saw nothing but shifting shadows. The weight of the school's history pressed down upon them, a suffocating reminder that some secrets were guarded jealously, by memories, by fear, and by the entity that lurked in the crimson shadows. Evelyn closed the ledger, her hands trembling. The path ahead was darker than ever, but now she held a key, a glimpse into the nightmare's origin. The boarding school was more than a place of learning. It was a mausoleum of lost childhoods, a nexus where innocence was devoured to fuel a malevolent hunger. Outside, the first hints of night crept through the stained glass windows, casting shards of crimson light across the floor. The staircase would soon appear again, its spectral steps beckoning, and Evelyn knew she was closer than ever to the truth. But with knowledge came danger. The entity was awakening, and it would not let her go without a fight. The past was unearthing itself, and the boarding school's darkest secret was ready to consume them all. "We have to prepare," Marcus said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening like forged steel. "Tomorrow, we confront the nightmare." As they left the library, the whispering shadows followed, a chilling reminder that in this place, the dead never truly rest. And neither would they. The moment I stepped toward the crimson staircase, a thick silence enveloped me, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath my feet. The staircase was alive, pulsing with a sinister rhythm. As if it were breathing, its blood-red steps shimmering with an unnatural light that twisted and contorted, refusing to stay still. Shadows slithered around the edges, forming shapes that teased the edges of my vision, disappearing whenever I dared to look directly. I hesitated, the weight of every whispered rumor, every vanished student pressing down on me like a physical force. But beneath the dread, an inexplicable pull urged me forward. The air grew thick with a scent I couldn't place, something faintly metallic, mingled with the stale odor of forgotten childhood toys and faded memories. The haunting melody floated through the air, low and mournful, a lullaby sung by unseen voices that resonated in my chest and unsettled my breath. As I ascended, the world around me began to shift. The familiar stone walls of the school dissolved into something fluid and dreamlike. Corridors stretched and warped, bathed in the same crimson light that bled from the staircase. The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple like water, each step sinking into a soft, yielding surface that whispered promises of forgotten joys and unspeakable horrors. Whispers echoed in the distance, soft, childish laughter that morphed swiftly into cries and sighs. I recognized some of the voices. They were the echoes of those who had vanished before me. Their presence was both a warning and a temptation, a reminder of the cost and a lure into the unknown. The walls bled faintly, as if the structure itself was alive, suffering. Faces flickered in the crimson stains, twisted, fleeting images of children frozen in moments of fear and pain. The air was thick with memories, not just mine, but those of countless others who had been drawn here and lost to the darkness. Then, from the shadows, the crimson entity emerged. It was terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. Its form was ever-shifting, a mass of blood-red shadows that flickered between a grotesque, monstrous shape and a fragile, distorted, childlike silhouette. Its eyes, if such a thing could be said to have eyes, glowed with a hunger that reached deep into my soul. It reached out to me with tendrils of mist, soft and yet cold as death, brushing against my skin and stirring something deep inside, a mixture of terror and an inexplicable longing. It whispered promises of safety, of belonging, of a place where pain could be forgotten and nightmares would fade. But beneath the seductive words lurked a threat, a trap woven from fear and despair. I felt my resolve waver as the entity began to unravel my memories, pulling at the threads of my childhood. Scenes played out before me, moments of neglect, of loneliness, the ache of loss that had shaped me. Each memory was a weapon, a key, and a chain. The entity twisted them, turning my past into a labyrinth I could barely navigate. I relived the cold nights alone, the unanswered cries, the desperate search for warmth and safety. The boundaries between what was real and what was conjured blurred, until I could no longer tell if I was standing in the school or trapped inside my own fractured mind. Yet, even as the shadows closed in, a fragile flame flickered within me, hope, stubborn and defiant. I clung to it, drawing strength from the memories of kindness and courage I had witnessed in others, from the faint but persistent light of empathy and determination. With trembling hands, I reached into the darkness, refusing to be consumed. The entity recoiled, its form writhing in rage and desperation, but I held fast. I whispered back, not with words but with the fierce will to survive and to protect those yet to come. The crimson staircase seemed to pulse in response, the glow dimming, the shadows retreating, if only for a moment. I knew this battle was far from over, but I had taken the first step toward breaking the cycle. The entity's lure was powerful, but not invincible. And as I stood there, heart pounding, breath ragged, I understood that the true horror was not just the staircase or the entity, but the memories and fears we carry within us. The childhoods lost and corrupted, the dreams turned crimson with pain. But I would fight, for myself, for my friends, for every vanished soul whose laughter still echoed faintly in the halls at dawn. The nightmare was far from over, but I was no longer alone in the dark. And with that, I stepped forward once more into the unknown, the staircase awaiting, its crimson depths promising both terror and revelation.